Yeah, so we had data on babies before the pandemic, right? Newborns, healthy before the pandemics, and discovered that there was a loss of bifidobacteria that occurred. That they had a lot of bifidobacteria, these newborns before the pandemic that were healthy, no problems, right? Because remember, I do fecal transplant, familial fecal transplant, where I take the stools of a healthy donor in the family that I determine is healthy, and then I put it in a kid with autism. That's the protocol that we are running right now with the FDA, that we're going to be running, that we're waiting for the, to get started and raise funds and everything. But ultimately, as I'm, assessing which patients, I had a lot of kids that were healthy in that section in the families of kids with autism. And that was kind of my baseline, right? Before the pandemic. What I started seeing with during the pandemic was really a drop, like an abnormal level of bifidobacteria in these newborns. And I have to say, the vaccines was definitely, something that we saw because I asked the questions to the moms. Did you vaccinate? Did you get vaccinated during the pregnancy? Did your kid get vaccinated during the pregnancy? Why did I do that? Because why was I asking? Why did I, sound the alarm on that? Because what was happening was that I was noticing, I did the study that we presented at the American College of Gastro, where we basically tested, physicians and people that were basically coming from the home to the front line, got vaccinated. And essentially, they got vaccinated. We tested their stools at baseline and then tested them after the vaccine and noticed a drop in the bifidobacteria post vaccination. We kept following these patients and we kept seeing a continuous drop in the bifidobacteria. That was the beginning for me. That basically said, wait, what's going on here? Why is this vaccine killing the bifidobacteria? Of course, as we continued following these patients, and I want to clear all that because I don't want everybody freaking out that they've killed their bifidobacteria. A lot of people regain their bifidobacteria after they stop the vaccination, but the acute timing from the time they left the house, they were, basically had a baseline of bifidobacteria level at 1 million, for example, or 10% bifidobacteria relative abundance. That's how we check the microbiome. To after the vaccines, at 1 month, they dropped by 50% and then dropped to zero. That was concerning to me because I started, thinking, what happens if you give it to newborns and they depend on on that bifidobacteria? I was very happy to see that there was a paper, a research that was done in California that basically looked at the microbiome, at the bifidobacteria of these newborns post pandemic, essentially. And the bifidobacteria, I was happy and not happy, actually, because I'm not happy about the fact that these babies, 25% of newborns now are born with adequate bifidobacteria. That's what the study showed, right? So that means 75 doesn't have an adequate level of bifidobacteria. Now, here's the question: as a scientist, as a physician, are those kids predisposed now to having diabetes? Because remember, bifidobacteria is the microbe that helps you break down the food so you can absorb the sugar into the cell, right? So are those microbes essentially disappearing, and therefore is the kid gonna have diabetic, is the kid gonna be diabetic, is the kid gonna develop autism, is the kid gonna develop a neuroblastoma? We're noticing kids with neuroblastoma have zero bifidobacteria. We're noticing, we notice autistic kids compared to their sibling had less bifidobacteria than their siblings, and even less bifidobacteria than the average healthy kid in the community. So we also noticed Lyme disease, loss of bifidobacteria, Crohn's disease, loss of bifidobacteria, diabetics, loss of bifidobacteria, invasive cancer, loss of bifidobacteria. So when you start mapping this loss of bifidobacteria with the diseases as the number one thing to begin with, you start seeing, wait, there's something there, right? We really have to pay attention to this bifidobacteria. The other thing that started happening through my research is I realized, because remember, research evolves, right? Again, I could have just been stuck at killing the virus, but instead I was courageous enough to, criticize my own patent, right? And say, you know what, hydroxyazithromycin, even though I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on a patent, it's obsolete. I'm not going to be pushing it. This is not something I would recommend for young people or kids because it takes a long time to rebuild the microbiome. It's just like antibiotics.